So I think if you have things that connect all the things that you do in the organisation, that's your architecture. It's a very useful kind of artefact, and it's kind of the gel that holds your organisation together.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers, and in each of these episodes, I get the privilege to sit down with different business process management practitioners who, aren't just learning theory, but they're putting into practice each day business process management principles. And so today I'm very excited. We have Lara Meyers joining me. She is a business architect at Powerlink, and she's got quite a diverse career, having worked in a number of large Australian organizations. And part of her experience has been setting up Center of Excellences around BPM. I'm really excited for this interview. Lara, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you. Nice
so
to be here.
What we might do to begin with is I'll pass it off to you to give the audience a bit more of a context and background around, I guess, where your interest in process first began, or where it was first introduced to you, and then take us on a bit of a journey leading up to what you're doing today.
Yeah, okay. So I guess I first got interested in business process management because I was always had a curiosity in what people did, a little bit of a voyeur, and I was interested in hearing people's stories.
Right.
And what. So sitting down and asking people what they did, how they went about what they did, but also hearing that story go across not just what people did within their day-to-day life, but how that then transferred to what the next person did, and then how that went along through different people's departments along the journey.
Right.
So, and then following along the bouncy ball, I guess.
Yes.
So I liked hearing those stories, and then hearing how that affected the end customer, and how and that journey, I guess. So I liked hearing that picture, and that curiosity then led me to the story, I guess, of business process, and I started studying business process at university. I did my business process management masters at QUT, like many people have, but I did it very early on. So I finished my masters 1999 at QUT, and then my journey into business process management took me to the US. So I worked in the US in consulting for quite a few years, and then came back to Australia as well. So I've been working in the US and Europe and Asia, and then came back to Australia as well.
Yeah, right. So I guess, like, having worked throughout Australia, America, Europe, and Asia, you'd have, I guess, that an experience there that you're able to see how the different I guess, geographical locations do business process management. And that's something I'd be interested to find out is there a difference, and what are the differences that you do notice? And I guess because you are now in Australia, how does Australia compare with the rest of the world?
I mean, I don't know if there's a difference, because I think that there was definitely the standard was set very early on. There was a standard set in in Japan and in Germany, that there was Lean and Kaizen and all of those sort of things, and those things have been have gone all around the world. So those standards have been set and followed everywhere. So I don't think that there is necessarily a variation in those. So it's So I think culturally there is a pattern that's a little bit different. Like I found, for
Right.
example, when I worked in Japan, like the Japanese are very into Kaizen, and there's practices that are very very into preciseness, for example.
Right.
And that was quite clear there that they have those Kaizen practices that are very inbuilt into their culture. When I worked in Germany, for example, in Germany there is definitely a very strong culture around process, and it's very strongly ingrained. I've met a lot of people I've never been to South Africa, but I meet a lot of people from South Africa who practice in the process area, and I hear that it's very strong process culture within the finance industry, for example, in South Africa. So there's definitely more probably strong process cultures in some countries than in other countries where it's picked up, I think.
Okay.
But I think that these probably some countries have picked up the process bug more than others, but I think that they still carry those same practices. And some might practice some forms of process more than others that they've, like they might practice like Deming or Lean, or they might have picked up more of a methodology than others in some areas, but they're all the same types of practices that have gone all around the world.
Yes. And something you mentioned as well earlier was about it was kind of like around you had a natural inclination to identify or understand what is the process, what's happening before these steps or activities, what's happening after these steps or activities, what is the complete end-to-end journey, and looking at that, understanding that, and looking for ways, can we do that better? And I do hear that in a number of the interviews I've done, how it is oftentimes it's a mindset that comes naturally to some people, where they naturally look for how to understand the process. They naturally look for ways they can improve it. Do you think that it is a mindset that does come naturally to some people, and can it also be taught to those that maybe don't have that mindset?
I think it's just I don't know. I think it can be taught to people, but I think that what I had was a curiosity. So I don't know. I don't know if you can teach people to, I think you can grow that curiosity in people if they don't have that curiosity, by drawing people's attention to that area. And I think that that's something that, for example, the QET program in the master's program has done for so many people, is really draw their attention to that area, and really grown that curiosity in people, because they probably weren't aware of it before. And that's what the beauty of that has been in Australia, in Brisbane. Because I think that it is a really interesting area. So I think. I think I just grew that curiosity very early. So, so I think it's just more a curiosity more than anything. And I have a curiosity in people and process, and I don't know if it's just because of my nature or nurture. So maybe some people have it in their nature, and but you can nurture it in people. I don't know. It's a little bit philosophical, but I think you can nurture that curiosity. Yes.
Okay, great. So when an organisation seeks to adopt business process management, whether they do it in a department, on a project level, or on a very small level, or whether they don't do it at all, and they're looking at, we can see value in understanding and improving our business processes. What is one of the biggest challenges or mistakes that you see an organization make when adopting BPM?
I think that BPM is a commitment in a way of thinking, and I think if you force that way of thinking when there's too many other ways of thinking going on in the organisation, then it's not going to happen, basically. For example, if an organisation is adopting kind of agile, for example, or customer journey mapping or something, like these things are very it's not that they're in conflict, or because they can be quite they can work in partnership to these ways of thinking. And so if there's a couple of these things going on at the same time, then they can work in partnership and move along quite nicely. So if there's two or three things going on, so like agile and BPM and sort of architectural ways of thinking and design thinking, for example, then that's great. So two or three of these things can work along in partnership and actually be quite synonymous and work along quite nicely. But if you've already got two or three new ways of thinking, such as kind of digital and agile and design thinking, for example, and then you try and bring BPM along as well, and you kind of cram all of these things in, and the organisation's trying to bring in a new mindset and new ways of thinking, and you cram in BPM into there, then it's just going to be too much for the organisation to think about. And and they're like, what? There's another thing coming along? So we're trying to do like customer mindset, and we're trying to do design thinking, and we're trying to think like this and trying to think like that, and you try and bring BPM into there, it's going to be too much, too many mind shifts for the organisation. So because it is a different way for the organisation to think, it requires a mind shift, it requires organisational commitment, it requires a way for it requires a commitment for for the organisation to think in ways to break down the silos of the organisation, and for a commitment for ownership of the organisation across those silos. And so if you can't really kind of have commitment to think in that way, and if you can't kind of take a time out of your day or workshops for management to kind of think in that way and make a commitment to governance then it's really kind of a waste of time. So you you really should probably say, well, let's do a little bit of that. Let's still make kind of progress along our BPM maturity. So maybe we should still document our processes. Maybe we should still have a process architecture. So still make progress along our maturity, but maybe the mind shift change, and maybe our process ownership and some of those bigger chunks of maturity we should save for a time when we can actually dedicate to actually make those kinds of commitments. Because if there's too much other stuff going on, your organisation won't be able to commit for those sort of things. So there's only so much change that an organisation can kind of adapt to at any one time, I think. So,
yes. And when an organisation, they've got maybe a number of different methodologies in there, a number of maybe management practices, and you're talking about this idea of shifting or diverting attention. Is that possible at the moment? Is that the best thing for the organisation at the moment? I guess one of the big questions that organisation would have, if BPM is a new idea to them, or a new management practice, is, well, what's the return on investment? What's the value in BPM? What is BPM going to provide that our current methodologies aren't already? And so I guess the question I have for you is, are there any examples that come to mind where an organization that maybe you've either been a part of or consulting to, where they've implemented BPM, and whether that's, they've looked at a process and improved and tweaked it slightly, or maybe they've done a radical innovation, but where an organization has done BPM and it has delivered significant value to the organization? Do you have any, like, an example that comes to mind that you'd be able to share about?
Well, I think, it really depends on what the goals are of the organisation. So I think where it does come into focus is where there's a significant return on investment, is where there's, for example, compliance goals. So I think in a finance type of environment, for example, so a lot of my experience and background has been in finance, and where there's compliance requirements. And in finance is quite compliance driven. So,
right.
And in a compliance environment, there's often a requirement to meet timelines and to change quite rapidly. And in that type of environment, you have to be able to change processes quite rapidly and be able to understand your processes, be able to understand who has to change them. And often you have processes where there's you do have quite specialised and siloed processes where, for example, you've got a credit risk process and a process that's owned by compliance type of risk. So you specialise, siloed those processes. So and then you've got who cuts across those processes that needs to have some sort of outcome, and they need a decision that needs to be able to, for example, like a loan mortgage or some sort of outcome that needs to go across those various functional bodies, and if you want to change that process, you need to make decisions with those various functional areas, and change those processes. So it's quite often quite difficult to be able to change those processes at the drop of a hat. And if there's compliance changes, it's actually, and often governments require you to change those processes quite rapidly, which is often quite a challenge for a lot of financial organisations. So it's often, BPM, helps out for those financial organisations to be able to help them, and so return on investment is often good for those organisations to help them find the owners, be able to organise their functional owners, to be able to make decisions rapidly, to be able to make decisions, to be able to change those processes, and be able to get some sort of decisions made about changing those processes. Yes. So I think that's probably one area. I think so.
Yeah, no, that's good. So because your current role is as a business architect, talk to us about where, I guess, what you're doing as a business architect, where that fits into BPM and how it connects or relates to, say, the other areas of business process management. I guess, like in these episodes, we're talking with a number of different people. We're talking with quite technical people that are really focused on the granular, detailed processes that they're understanding BPMN. We're talking about standards and notations and modeling and things like that. And then we're also talking with chief process officers that are at the strategy level, that are seeing the bird's eye view, and I guess relaying that to the CEO or the CIO or the CFO. So talk to us as a business architect, where does that fit into the BPM family or picture?
Yeah, so where I got into business architecture is when I was working in the United States, because I was working on process architecture artifacts, and so I had a lot of experience in implementing process architecture, high-level architectures. So you can imagine, for example, a bank on a page, which just has high-level definitions of what a bank does. Right. So at a very high level. So what does a bank do? A picture of all the high-level definitions of the different things that a bank might do. I'd probably done about kind of, in my time before I became a business architect, probably about 10 of those for different organisations doing various consulting gigs. And so I started working for major bank and insurance agents as a business architect in New York, and I said, look, I've been working on these process architects for different financial organisations, and I've been working on process architecture, but at a high level, this is just, this is what they do. And they said, oh, well, that's like a capability model. So in business architecture, we call that a capability model. And then I said, oh, this is a process architecture. So, right. So in business architecture land, they call it a capability model. In process architecture land, they call it a business process architecture. And I said, oh, they're basically the same thing. And so we had this kind of debate going between the business architects and the process architecture, or the business process, business BPM people. And it was an interesting kind of debate about whether they're the same thing or whether they're something different. It was interesting. Right. And anyway, but it was interesting because the main difference was, because they're quite similar, but the main difference was how they were utilised. And I found it interesting how the business architects were utilising the model in a lot more creative ways, but using a very similar kind of artefact. And right. But also, I think what was inspiring me about the business architecture world was that I found, even though I really, my BPM experience was really born out of, I talked about the curiosity of finding out what people did, and I really loved that journey of following my curiosity about people's jobs and also solving people's problems but also I found, though, that even though I was solving people's problems and solving customer problems, I didn't always sometimes it was solving the squeaky wheel, but I didn't always know that it was actually solving the company's problems. Whereas when I went into the area of business architecture, what I found was that you were going into the area of strategy, and that was a different space altogether, because when you go into strategy, you actually go into the area of, well, what is the company trying to achieve? Right. And so then you make the connection through the capability model of, well, what is the organisation trying to achieve? What is the marketplace that the company is trying to operate in? And using the capability model, which is very similar to the process architecture, and looking at where does the company want to invest in, what capabilities do you want to invest in, and then targeting the areas that you want to invest in, which capabilities do you want to increase your maturity in, and making sure that you're investing in the right areas and then targeting those areas. So it's really then making sure that you're not flailing around investing in areas and lost energy in areas that is you might be spending a lot of energy in that area, and it's all well and good, but it's not the area that's actually going to make a difference to that company, and making sure that it's viable for the long-term survival of that company into the future. So it's not just a squeaky wheel; it's the long-term survival of the company. And so that's what inspired me into the next phase of my career, I guess.
Yes. Yep. Okay, that's great. And obviously, when talking about strategy, it's what that the senior leadership, they're thinking strategy. That's what they're thinking, the executive team. When there would be a number of people that will be listening to this interview that maybe they're at a lower level within the organization. They're not thinking on that strategic level, but they see the value in BPM, and they can see where it can bring value to their organization. But obviously you need to get that buy-in or that sponsorship from the executive level. So how should that person go about presenting BPM in a way to that executive level that's speaking to what they want to hear, what they need to hear, and I guess speaking to the level that they're thinking on? How does BPM tie into strategy, and how do you pitch it to that executive level?
Well, I guess, I think it's helpful to have an understanding of what you do in the organisation. So I think that essential artefact is that process architecture or that capability model. To me, I think, you can have two models, but you're better off just to have one. So I'm an advocate for having the one model and making it useful for both users. So having it useful to connect to strategy and having it useful to connect to your process models or your lower level processes. But then you can also have things in there that might not have a process model behind it. So you might have things in there that are just strategic level capabilities. So
right.
So I think if you have things that connect all the things that you do in the organisation, that's your architecture. It's a very useful kind of artefact, and it's kind of the gel that holds your organisation together. And just keeping that simple and fluid, and it doesn't have to be exact. Like it's just the kind of the best known knowledge of what you do in the organisation at any point in time, and just kind of keeping that there and just keeping it sort of changed and updated all the time, and just kind of the best known knowledge of what we do, so I think and then having that visible to the organisation and transparent, and then connecting that and having governance around that, and then having heat maps around that, having visibility around, well, where are my pain points in my organisation? Do I have customer complaints around here? Where are my projects? Having that as a common language around, well, what can I see around this viewpoint? Do I have so what I've often had in my organisations that I've worked in is creating kind of heat maps, or and also having that as a common framework when you bring consultants in. It's like, rather than having consultants come in and use their own capability maps, get them to use the common framework that you have within the organisation, because consultants will come in and have a preference to use their own capability models. So have some sort of onboarding process when consultants come in to try and use your internal framework. So you've got a common language that everybody's using around a capability framework that's your own internal language that everybody's using, including consultants that are coming in. So use our language. Let's all the projects use this language. And then you're creating enterprise knowledge and framework. So every project that's using the same knowledge, so you're building a knowledge. You're building a knowledge base. You're using you're building a not just a knowledge base, but you're building an asset for the organisation about what we do and how much money we spend, where the pain points are, where our strategy is, where our investments are. And that is actually a huge asset for the organisation about what we do and where we're investing and where our strategy is.
Yeah, that's great. And obviously when, I guess, introducing BPM to an organisation or creating a centre of excellence for BPM, it's not just about ensuring that the executive team's on board, but ensuring that everyone that's conducting the processes, you're also getting buy-in from them, because if you're going to be changing processes, they're the ones that are carrying out the work, and they're the ones that might have been doing that process for the last 5, 10, 15 years. So you need to get buy-in from them so that when you do make changes to the process, they're on board with it and they're actually adopting those changes or those improvements or anything like that. So talk to me about, how do you get buy-in from the process practitioners, the frontline employees as well?
Yeah, so if you've got a common knowledge of what you do, then you can you get a knowledge of who owns the processes. And so if you've got a knowledge of who owns the processes, then how you do those processes, and then you start to get governance about how you do those processes and recording how you do those processes. And if you've got a tool for recording how you do those processes, then well and good. Yeah, so that's great. Yeah, no, I agree.
That's great. And so in setting up a centre of excellence for BPM, because that's something that not everyone can say they've been a part of, and for the people that are listening right now, whether they are at a lower level within the organisation, or whether there could be some executives that are listening to this episode and wanting to know, well, what does that look like? What are the key ingredients when setting up a centre of excellence for BPM?
Yeah, well, I mean, normally I've had a little bit of a like a little bit of a dashboard, I guess, for a few of the elements that you've set up. So sometimes I've had like a bit of a health metric or something about, if you've got a list of all your different processes, for example, you might have a bit of a dashboard which sets up, like, these are my, say you've got 10 high-level processes, and you might have a health metric and say you've got level 1 to 10 to say, like, 1 might be I've got some my high-level processes set up for my and 2 might be I've got some metrics set up for my processes. 3 might be I've got my owners set up for my processes. 4 might be I've got my you might have all the different measures for what your maturity is for your processes. Right. So, and then you've got like a little bit of a dashboard, and you just slowly kind of set up and try and go through your step by step for your processes, and you go through and you set them up one by one. So the first thing is you might just at least try and identify what those kind of top 10 processes are that you want to get a handle on. And then the next thing is you want to be able to kind of at least be able to work out who your owners are, make sure they're established, make sure that they've got the right requisite training, they understand what their responsibilities are. I mean, I think that's kind of essential. And then the next thing is, you probably want to at least be able to document at a high level, what your value chains are, and then you might want to document. Oh, I'm running out of batteries. Sorry. Then you might want to. We might have to have an interruption and then a restart if that's the case. So just if that's okay, and we can pick up. And then you might, but I think metrics and KPIs is really important as well. I would say that's one of the really high priorities. And then but I think there's other things. I mean, look, there's so many maturity models out there. I'm not going to kind of list all those things, but there's some other things in there that I think are really important. And then just go through the list one by one, and set your priorities and just and put those in there, whatever's worthwhile for your organisation to have in there, and put those in your community of community of practice is really important as well. But it's not all about resourcing. It's not all just about throwing money in there. It's just about going through your maturity and what's important for your organisation to have in there for your priorities for your organisation, and tick off which process is more important. So go through your key processes, so your top 3, and then tick off the ones that are more important for your highest risk processes, and then go down from there. Yeah.
That's great. And now looking towards the future of BPM in particular, so over the next 2, 3, 5 years, where do you think organizations should be giving their time, effort, and energy and attention when it comes to business process management?
I think that governance and process ownership is the most important across different functional areas. I think people still haven't tackled that cross-functional ownership in the way that that they need to. I mean, it's a big one. People still haven't completely got it. I think they're coming at it from different angles. So there's ways to talk about it, but people are still. I think there's new ways to tackle it through technology as well. So we talk about network ownership rather than bureaucracy, but the ways of managing through specialisation of activities through and handing things over a fence. So so I had the honour of attending the late Michael Hammer, one of a few of his training sessions before he passed away. He was the grandfather of re-engineering. He produced a few quite famous papers for the Harvard Business Review, but he made some great points about against silos. And he gave us all in the training course T-shirts that said he wanted to reverse the Industrial Revolution, and he was against Taylorism. And anyway, he was quite an entertaining kind of lecturer and trainer. He was quite a personality, and I wish I still had the T-shirts. They must be in my stuff somewhere anyway. but it was about reversing the Industrial Revolution one step at a time, or something like this. But anyway, he was it was very interesting. But but my point is that this whole idea of siloed, kind of specialised specialised silos kind of doesn't necessarily work, that we kind of need a networked way of working, and that sometimes you need the people that are working close with one another, servicing the customer, sometimes works better, and that we have to kind of work with more creative ways of servicing a customer and think of ways to do that. And I think that organisations are doing that, and sometimes it's just a matter of co-locating people and working out how we can work together, and sometimes you can because people are working in remote locations, we're kind of doing that anyway. We're all working and networking and working out how we're servicing the customer, because we're not actually sitting next to each other in a cubicle anyway. So we're all networked and working in a remote location, so we don't have those boundaries and cubicles and throwing things over the cubicle from one person to another, and we're in a network, in a virtual network anyway. So so we don't have that kind of bureaucracy, the bureaucracy is kind of being broken down virtually anyway. So it'll be interesting to see how COVID is changing that world anyway, and breaking down those silos.
Yes, yes.
We're kind of going into a new world.
Yeah, definitely. I think this year's been very disruptive for a lot of businesses, and in some cases, it's been very fruitful. You know, it's forced an organization to think outside the box, to I guess to question and challenge how they do things, how do they deliver value to the end customer. And there are some organizations that are growing quite rapidly, and I guess experiencing the fruit of this turbulent year. And of course, there are a lot of businesses that are have been thrown around a bit by the turbulent nature of this year. But Lara, I just want to thank you for sitting down and having this conversation with me today. Obviously, we can only scrape the surface in 40 minutes, but if the viewers that are listening, or the ones that are listening, if they just can walk away with one extra piece of information that's going to spark conversation or ignite something in their organization to help them improve that business, then that's an ultimate win here. We're hoping to spark that conversation and encourage collaboration. I'd also encourage for anyone that is listening right now that if you do want to learn more from Lara and her journey, I hope it's okay, Lara, for them to connect with you on LinkedIn and reach out and ask you questions. But it was a great conversation. Lara, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. It's been lovely talking to you.